crystal water glass made a small, definitive sound when my mother set it down between us like a gavel. We were in the back room of a steakhouse my father had reserved for what he called a family conversation, and the candles on the table had burned down to little waxy stubs because he had made me wait 40 minutes in the lobby before letting the hostess walk me back. My father didn't look up from his ribeye when he said it. "The Nantucket house closed yesterday, sweetheart. The proceeds are already in your sister's seed account. We're calling it your investment in the family's future." I thought I had misheard him. The Nantucket house had been my grandfather's, not theirs. Pop had built it himself in 1971 with his pension money from 22 years on the Boston police force, and he had left it to me in a will so airtight that the family lawyer had once described it as more locked down than the Vatican. It was supposed to be mine. It was the only thing in my life that had ever been just mine. I set my fork down. I tried very hard to keep my voice level. "What do you mean it closed?" My mother dabbed her mouth with the napkin and gave me the smile she used for waiters who got her order wrong. "Honey, don't be dramatic. Your sister has the Hartwell method launching in March. The retreat in Sedona alone is going to put her on the map. You can't expect her to bootstrap a wellness empire on Instagram followers." Across the table, my younger sister was scrolling through what looked like Pantone swatches on her phone. She had on a cashmere set that probably cost more than my monthly student loan payment, and she didn't bother to look up at me. She just hummed. "Mom's right. It's not personal. It's just timing. I'm going to skip ahead and tell you the basics because you need to understand what I was looking at across that table. My name doesn't matter for this. What matters is that I am 31 years old, I am a corporate litigator at a firm in downtown Boston, and I have been the family scapegoat since I was approximately 7 years old. I have a younger sister who has never held a job for more than 4 months, who once spent $11,000 on a spiritual cleanse in Bali, and who, the previous summer, had launched her third career reinvention as a somatic alignment coach. Before that, it was crystals. Before that, it was an essential oils MLM. Before that, it was a podcast about manifestation that lasted exactly 6 episodes. My grandfather had seen all of this coming. That is the only way I know how to say it. He had watched his own daughter, my mother, marry a man who treated money like a weapon, and he had watched them raise one daughter who became their mirror and another daughter, me, who they treated like a difficult employee. When Pop died, he left the Nantucket house to me. He left my mother a handwritten letter that, according to the lawyer, made her cry for about 90 seconds and then start asking when the estate would clear. The house was worth $1.4 million. "You sold my house," I said. My father finally looked up. He had the same expression he used in his quarterly investor calls, the one I had once watched him use to tell a roomful of retirees their pensions had been restructured. It was the face of a man who had never once been told no by a woman in his life and had no intention of starting now. "Sweetheart, you're a lawyer at a top 50 firm. You make $240,000 a year. You don't need a beach house. Your sister needs a runway. This is what families do. We reallocate. You don't have the legal authority to sell my house." "Don't we?" he said. He took a sip of his bourbon and held my eyes. "Talk to the title company. The paperwork's clean." I felt the room go quiet in that specific way rooms go quiet when something has just been broken that can't be put back. The waiter came in with our entrees and set them down and left, and nobody spoke. My sister kept scrolling. My mother started cutting her soul into small, neat squares. I stood up. My legs felt like they belonged to somebody else. "I want every dollar back by Friday, or I am walking into the Suffolk County DA's office on Monday morning." My father laughed. He actually laughed, and then he tilted his head like he felt sorry for me. "You won't. And do you know why you won't? Because I sit on the board of 2 of your firm's biggest clients. I have lunch with your managing partner once a quarter. One phone call from me, and that partnership track you've been crawling toward for 6 years disappears. Sit down. Eat your dinner. Be a good girl." I walked out. I left my coat. I walked 4 blocks through a freezing March drizzle before I realized I was crying, and then I sat on a bench outside a CVS and cried the way you cry when you finally understand something that has been true your whole life. By Tuesday morning, I knew exactly how much my father was capable of. My key card didn't work at the office. The security guard at the front desk, who had known me for 6 years and always asked about my dog, would not meet my eyes. He picked up a phone, said 2 words, and a paralegal I had supervised on 3 deposition cycles came down to escort me to a conference room on the 12th floor. The managing partner was already there, so was the head of HR. So was a man I had never seen before in a navy suit who turned out to be outside counsel for the firm. There was a folder on the table. "We've received some concerning communications," the managing partner said. He had the same gentle, regretful voice my dentist used before extractions. "Forward to the ethics committee anonymously. We're going to need you to walk us through these." He opened the folder and slid it across. There were screenshots. Emails I had supposedly sent from my work account to my younger sister, ranting about clients, calling our biggest pharmaceutical account a bunch of murdering frauds, threatening to leak privileged information to a journalist at the Globe. There were text messages I had never written. There was an entry from a Bumble profile in my name describing me as currently in recovery from psychiatric leave. "These aren't mine. Your father called us this morning. He's beside himself. He says you've been struggling since your grandfather's death, that you've stopped taking medication, that he's worried about your access to client files." The managing partner closed the folder with both hands. "We're placing you on indefinite unpaid leave pending an internal review. We're going to recommend you check yourself in somewhere. Use the time. Get well." I tried to speak. I couldn't get anything past the back of my throat. The paralegal walked me to my desk so I could collect my personal items in a banker's box in front of 17 people who would not look at me, and then she walked me to the elevator, and then she gave me back my visitor sticker and turned around and went back upstairs. I sat in my car in the parking garage for an hour. My hand shook so badly I could not get the key into the ignition. By Thursday, my checking account had been frozen. By Friday, my landlord had called to inform me that my March rent had bounced and that the next month would need to be paid in cashier's check. By Saturday morning, I logged onto Instagram for the first time in 2 weeks and discovered that my sister had posted a 38-minute monologue to her 190,000 followers, sobbing about her unstable older sibling who has been spiraling for years and is now trying to extort our family. The comments under it were a sewer. Strangers I had never met were calling me a parasite. A wellness influencer with 2 million followers had stitched the video and called for a boycott of toxic sibling energy. By Sunday night, I got a courier delivery at my apartment, a thick manila envelope. Inside was a civil complaint filed against me on behalf of my parents and my sister, alleging defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and tortious interference with my sister's business. The demand was $800,000. Behind the complaint was something worse, a notarized power of attorney granting my father full control over my finances in the event of mental incapacity dated October of the previous year, my signature perfect on the bottom, witnessed by a notary I had never met. October. Pop had been buried in October. The signature was dated the same week I had been sitting Shiva at my grandfather's apartment, accepting casseroles from his elderly neighbors. I sat on my kitchen floor with the papers fanned out around me and laughed because it was the only sound I had left. There is a particular flavor of poverty that hits very fast when you have a 6-figure salary and then you don't. 6 days. That is how long it took me to start looking at my pantry as a budget. I had $1,100 in a savings account my father had not been able to touch because it was in a different bank under my mother's maiden name, opened when I was 16 for a college fund my parents had never funded. I had no credit cards because my father had reported them all as fraudulent. I had a 2014 Honda Civic with a quarter tank of gas. I drove to the Boston Public Library every morning at 9 and stayed until they closed. The first thing I did was reread my grandfather's will. I had a copy in a banker's box under my bed. I read it 3 times. Then I read every document the estate lawyer had sent me, every email, every closing statement, and I started building a timeline in a yellow legal pad because I am, despite all available evidence, a corporate litigator. The second thing I did was start looking at my father's hedge fund. He had founded Marlowe Capital Partners in 2003 and had grown it to roughly $600 million under management. For the last 4 years, every quarterly report had reassured investors that returns were healthy and that the fund's positions in distressed commercial real estate were well hedged against macro headwinds. I knew this language. I had drafted language like this for clients. I knew what it sounded like when somebody was lying. I pulled every public filing I could find. SEC, State of Delaware, Massachusetts Secretary of State, county property records in 3 states. I made spreadsheets. I made flowcharts on the backs of library scratch paper. What I found made me feel cold in a way I had not felt since I was a child. My sister's wellness brand, the Hartwell Method, was registered as an LLC in Wyoming. The sole director was listed as me. The EIN was tied to my social security number. The bank accounts had been opened the previous fall using a copy of my driver's license that had been scanned, I realized, from a passport renewal form I had given my mother to mail for me 2 summers earlier. The Hartwell Method had reported in its first 9 months of operation $4.1 million in consulting revenue. It had no employees besides my sister. It had no products that I could find for sale. It had no office. Its only listed address was a UPS store in Cheyenne. The money was coming in from 3 offshore accounts in the Caymans. The money was coming out as wire transfers to 7 different real estate holding companies, all of which traced back after about 11 hours of digging to Marlowe Capital Partners' distressed debt fund. My father was not just stealing from me. He was running a money laundering operation through my sister's fake wellness brand to plug the holes in his collapsing hedge fund, and he had put my name on every piece of paper that mattered. If the SEC or the IRS ever pulled the thread, the only person whose face was on the file cabinet was mine. The lawyer with the bar number, the CFO of record, the signatory on the offshore accounts, me. I sat in the 3rd floor reading room of the BPL, and I understood, finally, with absolute clarity, what my father had meant when he said I should be a good girl. I did not call him. I want to be very clear about that because I know what I would think if I were watching this from the outside. I did not pick up a phone. I did not send an email. I did not give him a single hint that I had figured it out. I went home. I made myself a cup of tea. I sat at my kitchen table and I started a list. The list had 3 columns: what I knew, what I could prove, what I still needed. Then I drove to Nantucket. The closing on the house had been a cash sale to an LLC called Bluefin Holdings, which I had already traced back to a college roommate of my father's who lived in Greenwich and almost certainly did not know what he had signed. The new owners were not scheduled to take possession until April 15th. The lockbox code I knew was the last 4 digits of my grandfather's badge number, because my grandfather had used those 4 digits as a password for everything from his Netflix to his garage door. I let myself into Pop's house at 4 in the afternoon on a Wednesday in late March. The heat was off. The pipes had been drained. The furniture was draped in white sheets like a movie set, and the front room smelled like cold pine and salt air and the particular dust that gathers in summer houses in the winter. I stood in the foyer and I cried for about 10 minutes, and then I got to work. My grandfather had been a Boston cop for 22 years. Before that, he had been an MP in Korea. He was a man who had not trusted banks, who had buried a coffee can of silver dollars in his backyard in Quincy in 1979, who had taught me when I was 9 how to identify a forged check by the way the ink pooled at the loops. The summer I was 12, he had shown me the hollow place behind the wainscoting in the upstairs guest bedroom where he kept what he called the just-in-case stuff. He had made me memorize the location like a multiplication table. I went upstairs. The wainscoting came off with a butter knife from the kitchen drawer. Inside, in a Folgers can wrapped in a Ziploc bag, were 3 USB drives, a leather-bound notebook, and a stack of cassette tapes in a rubber band. The notebook was my grandfather's handwriting. He had been keeping it for the last 6 years of his life. He had titled it, on the inside cover, in his careful capital letters, Notes on the Family, in case. The first entry was dated 2018. The last entry was dated 2018. The last entry was dated 3 weeks before he died. He had been watching them. My grandfather, who I had loved more than any human being I have ever known, had spent the last years of his life quietly documenting his daughter and son-in-law. because he did not trust them and he had not trusted what they would do to me when he was gone. He had recorded phone calls on a digital recorder he kept in his shirt pocket. He had photographed documents my father had left out on the kitchen island during Christmas visits. He had a USB drive labeled in Sharpie Marlowe that contained 31 gigabytes of files my father had emailed to himself from his work account using my mother's Yahoo address as a backup. There was a tape of my mother and father at the kitchen table in Nantucket the August before my grandfather died. Pop had set the recorder in a fruit bowl. My father, on the tape, in a voice I had heard my entire life, was explaining to my mother how the Hartwell method paperwork would work. He used my full name. He said it 3 times. He said, and this is a direct quote that I will hear in my head for the rest of my life, "She's the safest bet we have. She's the only one of us with a clean bar card and no priors and a tax return that doesn't raise eyebrows. By the time anybody looks, she'll be the only name on the file." My mother had said, "What if she figures it out?" My father had said, "She won't. She wants us to love her too much. She'll eat whatever we feed her." I sat on the floor of my grandfather's guest bedroom with my back against the bed frame and I listened to that tape 4 times in a row. I did not cry. I had stopped crying. Something else had taken its place, and that something else was very, very still. I drove back to Boston that night with the Folgers can on the passenger seat. Here is what I did over the next 6 weeks. I am going to tell you in order because the order matters. I did not contact my parents. I did not respond to any of the 11 voicemails my father left, escalating from concerned to threatening over the course of a single week. I did not engage with my sister's increasingly unhinged Instagram posts. I let them think I was breaking. I drove to a Holiday Inn Express in Providence, paid cash for a week, and used the business center to make copies of everything. 2 physical copies. 3 encrypted digital copies on USB drives I purchased at 3 different Best Buys with cash. I mailed 1 set of physical copies to a law school friend in Seattle with instructions to open it only if I called and used the word lighthouse. I put 1 set in a safe deposit box at a credit union in Worcester that I had never used before and that my father had no reason to know existed. I retained with the last of my $1,100 and a personal loan from the same Seattle friend, a criminal defense attorney named Robert Ashland who had spent 15 years as an assistant U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York before going into private practice. I drove to his office in Hartford so there would be no paper trail in Boston. He listened to me for 90 minutes without interrupting once. When I was done, he said, "Honey, what you have here is not a civil case. What you have here is a federal indictment in a box." He made calls. He knew people. Within 9 days, I was sitting in a conference room in a federal building in New Haven, across from 2 FBI agents from the Boston field office's white-collar squad and an attorney from the SEC's enforcement division, and I was walking them through my grandfather's spreadsheets 1 column at a time. They listened. They asked questions. They took my USB drives. 6 days later, they called Robert and told him they wanted me to wear a wire to my sister's launch party. The Hartwell Method launch was held at the Boston Harbor Hotel on a Saturday in late April. My sister had rented the Grand Ballroom. There were 300 guests, an open bar pouring something called alignment cocktails, a string quartet, and a step and repeat with the Hartwell Method logo, which my sister had paid a graphic designer $4,000 to make and which looked, to my eye, exactly like the logo of a yoga studio in Brookline. I walked in at 8:15 wearing a black dress I had bought at a consignment shop in Cambridge for $46 and a small recording device taped to the underwire of my bra. My parents saw me from across the room at the same instant. My mother's face went white. My father's went red. My sister, on a small stage in front of a projector screen, was midway through telling a story about her awakening in Tulum and did not notice me until her mother grabbed her elbow. My father crossed the ballroom in about 9 seconds. "You need to leave, right now, before I call security." His voice was low and pleasant, and a vein in his temple was doing something I had only ever seen it do once before, the night he had thrown a glass at my mother in 2009. I smiled at him. I had practiced the smile in my bathroom mirror for 2 days. "The police are already on their way, Dad. They're just not coming for me." The doors at the back of the ballroom opened. 11 federal agents came through them. 2 SEC investigators, 4 FBI agents, 3 from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, and 2 U.S. Marshals. They moved through the crowd the way water moves around rocks, smooth and inevitable, and the room went quiet in stages as people realized what they were looking at. The lead agent was a woman about my age in a navy pantsuit. She walked up to my father and showed him her badge and said his full name in a voice that carried. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, securities fraud, money laundering, identity theft, aggravated identity theft, and conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent." The handcuffs were the loudest sound I had ever heard. My mother started screaming. She actually screamed, this high keening sound that I had never heard come out of a human being before, and 2 of the agents had to physically restrain her because she tried to run. My sister, on the stage, just stood there. The microphone was still in her hand. She was looking at me and her mouth was open, and she did not seem to be breathing. I walked up to the stage. I took the microphone out of her hand. I leaned into her ear and I said, quietly enough that only she could hear, "Consider this my contribution to your alignment, sis." I handed the microphone to one of the agents. I walked out of the ballroom past 300 people who would tell this story at dinner parties for the rest of their lives, and I went home. This is the part of the story where everybody wants details, so I will give them to you in the order I learned them. My father was indicted on 23 federal counts. His attorney tried for a plea deal for 14 months and got nowhere because Robert had given the U.S. Attorney's Office a roadmap so complete it was practically a coloring book. He took the case to trial in February of the following year. The jury was out for less than 5 hours. He was sentenced to 11 years in a federal correctional institution in West Virginia. Marlowe Capital Partners was forced into receivership. The investors got pennies on the dollar, but they got more than they would have without me, and 3 of them sent me handwritten letters that I keep in a drawer in my desk. My mother took a plea for conspiracy and obstruction, 5 years. She served 3. My sister was charged as an unindicted co-conspirator. She testified against my father in exchange for immunity. Her wellness brand was dissolved by court order. Her Instagram was suspended, then reinstated with about 14,000 followers, then suspended again after she got into a comment section fight with a journalist. The last I heard, she was working the front desk at a yoga studio in Worcester and living with a man who has a tattoo of a wolf on his neck. I have not spoken to her in 3 years, and I do not plan to. I sued my old law firm for wrongful termination and defamation. I settled for an amount I am not legally allowed to disclose, but which let me pay off my law school loans, buy a small condo in the South End, and put a down payment on something else I will get to in a minute. The managing partner was forced to retire. The associate who had walked me to the elevator with my banker's box now works at a firm in Chicago and sent me a LinkedIn request last year that I have not accepted and will not. The forged power of attorney was vacated by a probate judge in 11 minutes. The notary lost his commission and is currently a defendant in a separate fraud case I am told is going badly for him. The Nantucket house had to be unwound. The sale was voided. Bluefin Holdings was forced to return it to my grandfather's estate, which returned it to me, and I drove out there on the first warm Saturday in May to walk through it for the first time as its actual owner. I sat on the back porch and watched the harbor for 2 hours and did not cry, because by then I had cried all the crying I needed to cry, and what was left was something quieter and more durable. I opened my own practice last September. I rent a small office on Beacon Street with 1 window and a view of nothing in particular. I do plaintiff side work, mostly. White-collar fraud victims, employment cases, elder financial abuse. I have a paralegal named Margaret who is 64 years old and was a public defender in Roxbury for 30 years before her husband died, and she runs my office the way my grandfather ran his beat, which is to say with absolute authority and a low tolerance for nonsense. I have more clients than I can take. I turn away 3 a week. The thing nobody tells you about getting your life stolen and then getting it back is that you don't get the same life back. You get a different one. The version of me who walked into that steakhouse last March is gone. She believed certain things about her family that turned out not to be true. She trusted certain people who had not earned it. She was, in some way I am only now beginning to understand, still a child. The woman who walked out of that ballroom in April is not a child anymore. I think about my grandfather every day. I think about him sitting at his kitchen table in Nantucket with that little digital recorder in his shirt pocket, watching his own daughter and son-in-law plot against the granddaughter he loved, and choosing not to confront them, choosing instead to document, choosing to leave me the tools and trust that, when the time came, I would know how to use them. He was a cop for 22 years. He knew what evidence was for. The last entry in his notebook, dated 3 weeks before he died, was 3 sentences long. I have it framed on my office wall behind glass, and I look at it every morning when I sit down at my desk. It says, "She is going to need this. She is going to need this. She is stronger than they know. When they come for her, she will be ready." I have read those 3 sentences probably 800 times. He was right about all 3. I used to think the worst thing a family could do to you was forget your birthday or pick favorites at Thanksgiving. I was wrong. The worst thing a family can do to you is decide, quietly, behind closed doors, that you are a resource, not a person, a line item. That's what my father did to me, and that's what my mother signed off on, and that's what my sister benefited from for 29 years before the bill finally came due. The thing I've learned, sitting in my little office on Beacon Street and looking at nothing in particular, is that cause and effect is real. It isn't mystical. It isn't karma in some cosmic sense. It is just the simple, brutal mathematics of choices. My father chose over and over again for decades to treat the people who loved him as instruments. He chose to put my name on documents I'd never seen. He chose to laugh at a kitchen table in Nantucket with my mother and explain how I would be the safest bet for their fraud because I wanted them to love me too much. Every one of those choices was a small deposit into an account that was eventually going to come due, and it did, with interest. What I want to say to anybody listening to this is that strength is not loudness. I spent 6 weeks at the Boston Public Library, not because I was waiting for inspiration, but because I understood, finally, that the only way out of what my father had built was to be smarter than he was and quieter than he expected. He counted on me being a child. He counted on me calling him in tears, the way I had at 22 when I'd failed the bar the first time, the way I had at 26 when a boyfriend broke my heart. He counted on me showing my cards, and I did not. The lesson my grandfather taught me in that notebook he left behind was that integrity is not the same as innocence. Innocent people get eaten. Integrity is what you do when you know exactly how dark the world can be and you refuse to become it. Pop spent 22 years on a beat in a city that would have made most men hard, and he came home every night and read me Beverly Cleary books on his lap. And when he saw what his own daughter was becoming, he did not rage, and he did not cut her off. He documented. He prepared. He left me the tools. If there's anything I want you to take from this story, it's that the people who try to break you are almost always counting on you being too tired or too lonely or too desperate for their approval to fight back the right way. Don't give them what they're counting on. Be still. Be patient. Build your case. The truth is a slow thing, but it has weight, and weight eventually wins. My father is in West Virginia for 11 years because the math finally caught up with him, and I am here, in a quiet office, helping other people understand that they are not crazy and they are not alone, and the law, used correctly, is the most powerful tool a wronged person owns.